Very well, do I have a motion to come
I
back?
move we come back out of executive session.
Second. This is the third, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Very well, we're now back in session. Ms. Manager. Mr. Mayor, members of council, the purpose of our discussion and dialogue today is to outline what we have done in terms of the city of Tucson respective to Army Park and the Occupy Tucson movement. To give a chronology of events, the Parks Director, Mr. Fred Gray, and the Police Chief, Chief Senor, have been in communication with Occupy Tucson representatives since October 11th, respective to our ordinances and fees associated with permitting of parks. Mr. Gray had communicated the parameters associated with permitting a park to event organizers, and we have emails that codify that information was disseminated. We've had subsequent meetings internally with the city attorney, myself, assistant city manager Liz Miller, police chief, to determine a process and a course of action dating back to October 12th as to what the foundation would be in terms of dealing with Occupy Tucson in an event that the associated liability costs were not paid or the associated permits were not obtained. Through those discussions, a platform was developed that included a foundation that will provide a strategy for the Parks Director and the Police Chief to work from. The platform being that one is that the freedom of speech and First Amendment rights would be guaranteed by all, respective to the city of Tucson, Tucson Police Department, and the Parks Department. Secondly, that we would enforce our codes and ordinances respective to what was associated with the Occupy Tucson movement. And third, that we were to avoid all kinds of physical confrontation, if all possible, even though we did feel that there might be individual actions that would require police response. From that, there were other discussions that went on from October 12th to the 15th in terms of alternatives, and there were other meetings that were going on between Occupy Tucson participants, internally and externally, to try to come up with alternatives to deal with the associated permitting and payment of liability costs. However, there was no alternative reach between us and the Occupy Tucson participants. And on October 15th, we were forced to go in at 10:30 when the park closed, and the associated ordinances were mandated to require enforcement. Citations were issued in lieu of any kind of physical arrest and taking people to jail. Again, using the platform that we were going to try and be as accommodating and peaceful amongst ourselves, between the participants and the police, but again, making it known that we were going to enforce our laws and ordinances through the issue of citations. As a footnote, the cooperation between the organizers has been very well between us and the police, and the associated commentary that I've gotten back regarding the police department is that the police department has handled themselves in a respectful and dignified manner also. So the issue between the Occupy Tucson participants and the police department is a non-issue. There have been cooperation and dialogue going on, not only between the participants, but the chief of police himself has been out several times talking to participants and dealing with any kind of dialogue that we might want to have in terms of looking at different alternatives. On October 16th, there were several discussions that went on between myself, Ms. Miller, the city attorney, and police chief in terms of looking for alternatives to avoid any kind of furtherance of deliverance of citations or arrests. to include looking at other city properties where we might find an alternative for these folks to go to. There was also discussion about a private entity that would accommodate them to a certain extent, and those dialogues went on throughout Sunday, and there was outreach to participants to, again, look for different alternatives in terms of what we could do to free up the park so that we could, again, deal with the people who want to use the park, people who have already paid their fees and associated costs in terms of using the park, but also the other issues in terms of just landscaping and dealing with the maintenance of the park. These dialogues have continued on to date between my office, City Attorney's office. We've looked at different alternatives. We've looked at what is going on throughout the country in terms of this movement, and we have yet to find any remedy that is accommodating to event organizers in association with our ordinance and rules. So therefore, the process in terms of citing and dealing with the Occupy Tucson movement with the use of citations and enforcing the laws through the use of citations and non-physical arrest continues today. I can say that we have spent many hours looking at different alternatives to deal with the issue, but the fact remains is that the rules and ordinances for parks are being violated. We are going to enforce through citations, but there is now a period of time where we are going to butt up against events associated with the permitting and the liability costs that people have paid. But then again, we're also looking at issues in terms of the everyday use of the park and the maintenance and liability issues that go on with maintaining that park. So, in summary, we have, prior to the event, look at different alternatives to provide for Occupy Tucson. During the event, we use a platform of trying to be as non-confrontational as possible, but again, enforcing our laws and ordinances and doing our best to guarantee the rights of the event organizers. But again, we are, at a point where staff has not come up with any sufficient alternative for me to recommend to Mayor and Council.
And Mayor, members of Council, what I would add to that is that the city actions that the manager has just described have been supported throughout on my legal advice and legal advice from my office, which effectively is that the codes that we're enforcing, and particularly in this instance the park codes, are in fact valid constitutional regulations of conduct that are defensible under the Arizona and federal constitution. And that continues to be our position, and I continue to be in communication with the manager and the police chief on a daily basis.
Well, I think that's a summary of the status of where we are, which says that we are continuing our current procedures, but continuing the dialogue is the essence of what I'm hearing. Councilman Romero.
First and foremost, Mr. City Manager, I want to commend you and the City Attorney and your staff, the Chief of Police, for really containing this this conversation and this issue, and being able to communicate with the people trying to practice their First Amendment freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. Now, I think you've done a wonderful job, every staff member, you know, Liz, Chief Villaseñor, everyone, Fred Gray, everyone involved in this has done wonderfully. I'd like to ask Mr. Our Chief Villaseñor, the practices that are being used every day. I know that he's sent us a memo describing that there is savings in terms of not having to do physical arrest. And so I'd like for you to talk a little bit, Chief, about the situation and the money that we actually have been saving by not having to do physical arrest.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman. Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Romero, Council members, Mr. Manager. We have consciously made a choice of not physically booking the participants in Occupy Tucson movement because of the resource and financial issues that this brings forward. Knowing that this was somewhat of an unusual venture that was occurring across the country, the first night when we responded and we talked with the participants in the Occupy Tucson, we didn't really know what our numbers were going to be for the arrest. We had a much larger number of people at that time, and when it came down to the time of citing, we tried to say that you could leave right up to the moment we made the determination that we were going to cite and not book. By doing that, because each time we book someone in the county jail, there is a charge, a first night charge of over $225. We also have to count in the time it would have taken for our officers to transport the individuals to the jail, get them booked in the jail, and then respond back to the scene, and that's a resource allocation. So by doing it in this manner, we have avoided the expenditure of $71,000+ since the protest has started.
And if you can share with us, maybe, Chief, you've I don't know if you've had conversations with other chiefs of police in other cities, and I know that Mike Rankin has had conversations with other attorneys in other cities. What are other cities doing? I know that last week at Call to the Audience, some members of Occupy Tucson came, spoke at Call to the Audience, and talked about, I believe, Cincinnati and Los Angeles. So what have you been hearing out there?
Councilmember Romero, I was just on this weekend at a meeting of chiefs from large cities across the nation where Occupy Tucson was one of the topics that we did discuss. And it is different in every community. The particular issues around that community, the involvement of members of that community, and the relationship that they have with their department all play factors into this. I remember that last week's meeting in Los Angeles was mentioned about sponsorship. I did get a copy of the resolution that was put forward by the Council of Los Angeles, and that dealt with a statement of support for the Occupy Los Angeles, also a recognition that it tied back to another ordinance that they were talking about, which dealt with fair banking issues. They also did mention within that resolution that whereas the protesters from Occupy Los Angeles were now involved in the permit application process, that they would endorse their actions. In Chicago this week, where the meeting I was at took place, yes, on Saturday they had an event with some other protests where they ended up arresting and booking a large number of individuals. So it varies by community as to how they handle and respond to the situation. Some arrest and book and remove the camps, some cite and release, some don't enforce at all.
And I'm getting exactly the same information, full range of different types of responses, dictated as much by the individual situations of each city and the nature of the movement or the demonstration in that location. In some instances, they're locating in parks, and in other instances, they're not in parks, so there's different regulations at play. But just as the chief explained, everything from ejectment from the park that they may be occupying to citations as we're doing to custodial arrests.
What happens with the events that are coming up? I know that there's a scheduled November 5th event at Armory Park, and then there's the Tour of Tucson. Can you, maybe Fred Gray is here, could you talk to us a little bit, Fred, about what the plans are? And maybe Mike Rankin, you could talk to us about moving forward and communicating this to the Occupy Tucson staff.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Romero, the Occupy Tucson organizers, if you've spoken with, are aware of the events that are scheduled, that they are booked, and reservations and policies are in place for that to occur. We certainly anticipate for those events to happen, as do the event organizers of those particular events. The two that you referenced is also El Tour in Tucson will be coming up in the middle of November. There are other events as well, but those are the two most immediate that we expect to continue to occur.
And Councilmember Romero, I have been communicating with at least one representative of the legal team for Occupy Tucson. I'll continue to do that, including sharing of information along the lines of what the Parks Director just described.
Councilmember Scott?
Mr. Gregg, do you have any recollection in the areas that are being used right now as to how often they need to be irrigated to keep the area appropriately prepared for any group that has taken out permits?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Scott, the watering schedule, irrigation schedule generally occurs in the evening hours after the park closes and before it opens the next day. The amount of watering in the schedule for that is dependent upon the time of year and the weather. Certainly during the summer months, it's more frequent. During this time of year, it becomes less frequent. However, the weather in the past couple of weeks has been still hot and dry, and so the watering would have ordinarily occurred on a routine basis, on a daily basis, probably to the tune of about 2 or 3 hours a day. I've done that since Thursday before.
Okay. I have a question for our chief. Have you had any indication that the Occupy Tucson participants, have they embraced any at all who walk in, or has there been any person or persons who've come and they were asked to leave? Has that occurred at all?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Scott, there was an event over the weekend where one individual was at Fiscal Park who was not part of the Occupy Tucson movement, who the members of Occupy Tucson did not want his presence there. But at the other park, there have been people who have come in, and there have been some members who have not been involved who have come in there, and there hasn't been that many problems. If someone is disruptive or someone is causing disturbance, they have come to us and asked us to remove them from the park and to not allow them to continue to disturb the park.
So there have been some times when this group has asked for police assistance for their safety.
Yes, ma'am. They have asked us to remove those individuals from the park for violating the tenets that they're following.
Have you had to rearrange the schedules of some of your officers to accommodate this kind of thing?
Quite often. That's how we're dealing with it now, rearranging and trying to use on-duty officers to deal with this, to cool down overtime costs. Because even though I talked about the avoidance of cost of the $71,000 by not booking, this has cost me over $36,000 in overtime.
Thank you. And the other question I have is for knowing whether or not the people who actually have institutions in that immediate area, have there been any complaints that are beginning to come from any of those institutions at all?
I was gone over the weekend, so I was not aware of anything over the weekend, but prior to that time, I had not been informed of it.
I think I had like to ask if anyone has heard of any folks who live in the area or any museums and so forth who feel like this is affecting their function. And so I was just asking if that has been the case.
I can answer that. I've heard from the Stillwell House, I've heard from the Children's Museum, and I've heard from the Senior Center in the area.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Trembus.
Thank you. Chief, up to this point, how many individuals have been cited in the parks, and how many individuals of those have been cited repeatedly since?
We have issued over 300 citations since the beginning up until last night. I cannot tell you how many individuals have been cited repeatedly, but I would give an estimate of probably over 30 to 40 have been cited repeatedly. We've had some individuals cited twice in the same night, where we will cite them at Armory Park. This weekend we started to get encampments at Fiscal Park, we go over there, and by the time we go there to issue citations, people who were cited in Armory Park go over to Fiscal Park to receive a second citation that night.
So we have the individuals in two areas now.
Correct.
And what is the fine for the first offense? I've heard up to $1,000 the first spot, but,
Well, Vice Mayor, it is a misdemeanor offense, and there are maximums set in place for, I'm sorry, I called you Vice Mayor, Council. Flashback a few months ago. There are maximums set in place for misdemeanors of up to $1,000 in 6 months. However, there are no minimums set in place, and that's really going to be the discretion of the judge along with input from the prosecutor's office that determines that.
and so this process now is in the courts for those folks that have been cited.
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Just for Mike, Mr. Rankin, other cities have ordinances similar to ours, correct?
Councilmember Fingers, yes.
And what I just heard is that LA, who was a co-sponsor of this activity, also the folks participating received a permit.
Based on the resolution that we got from City of Los Angeles, that's correct. They, within the body of the resolution, noted the participants attempting to securing a permit for the use.
So in our ordinance, we require not only the permit, but also insurance, liability insurance, correct?
As part of a permit that might be issued for uses otherwise not authorized in the park, that's correct. There's a series of criteria which for something like this would certainly include providing liability insurance, naming the city of Tucson as an additional insurer.
And the other good thing is you're still meeting, Mr. Manager and Mr. Rankin, with the folks and trying to come up with a solution that can work with everybody, correct?
Well, I'm continuing to communicate with their legal representative, and we'll do so as long as it's productive.
Councilmember Romero.
You know, this is a difficult issue, I think, for all of us, because there's no clear answers. Some suggest looking at our policies, and I would ask you, you know, how would that happen? I mean, it would be very difficult, and you tell me, to differentiate between uses. For example, on one hand, we have to be cognizant about the laws and ordinances we have that keep our public spaces and parks safe for Tucson families to use. On the other hand, we have issues of freedom of speech that the participants of Occupy Tucson and actually throughout the world, people are saying, look, this is our right, it's our First Amendment right of freedom of speech. The protection of this speech is critical for me, for our democracy, to make sure that that citizens in Tucson feel that they can practice their freedom of speech, but we also have to make sure that the policies and laws that we have in our book are used equitably. Would there be an opportunity to look at our ordinances and say, for these particular uses, we can, you know, you can use it for public gatherings and protests, and for these other uses, you can't. We're trying to differentiate between freedom of speech and assembly in one side, and in the other side, other types of uses that would endanger Tucson families. Could a policy that we have on our books be changed to reflect that?
Councilmember Romero, Mayor and Council do have legislative authority and so can review the ordinances of the City of Tucson. But the issue that you're raising is in fact the core issue, the core problem in trying to regulate activity that includes expressive activity or potentially assembly or free speech. And that is basically the cardinal rule. Any regulations that you have to remain content neutral and viewpoint neutral. So the very act of trying to differentiate is what gets you in trouble under the Constitution. The reason that our existing ordinances are defensible, valid constitutional provisions are that they don't differentiate. They are content neutral, they are viewpoint neutral, and they're in place to regulate conduct and promote legitimate governmental interests, the safety of the parks, the use of the parks by the community as a whole. And those are all legitimate interests that support the validity of the ordinances.
So you're saying that trying to differentiate between uses in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and other uses would get us into a gray area?
Absolutely.
In terms of liability, I know that you've mentioned to me that there's concern because of liability, because of what could potentially happen to the people using the park right now, whether it's health issues or unintentional fires. You know, a tent sparks up and something might happen to people using the park. Are there any liability waivers that the Occupy Tucson protesters could potentially sign so that we can be assured that liability is not an issue moving forward?
Councilmember Romero, liability issues are certainly a concern, as well as not just the liability, but the safety of the folks who are participating or who are impacted by the event one way or another. Getting written waivers from folks who may or may not be participating in the activities of the parks gives us no worthwhile protection, because it would not protect the city certainly against injury incurred by any other party, by any third party, by any adjoining property owner, and quite frankly the waivers themselves have very limited utility. For example, a waiver is not going to protect the city against liability for an injury that's caused by an unreasonable hazard that we knew about and didn't take steps to address.
Has staff and administration had conversations with organizers about permits, about getting permits?
There have been some conversations about that, but today there's been no application or request for a permit.
Well, I would suggest that we, as a city, I think staff, city manager, you've done a wonderful job leading the city, and staff, the city attorney, our chief of police. I would encourage that you continue looking at alternatives, looking at what other cities are facing, what other cities are doing, and taking into account the opportunity for free speech, which nobody here at this table or anywhere else is arguing about, while also protecting the public laws and public spaces that we have in the city of Tucson.
Another comment, Councilman Sasha.
Two quick ones to clarify with respect to the differential enforcement. It just strikes me that to the extent that we embrace differential enforcement, we make it more problematic for us to enforce the laws more generally. That would be one comment. And the other is that you touched on it, and Shirley also did, and that is the council adopts ordinances, the city manager executes the ordinances, and the city courts adjudicate, and that represents a pretty clear separation of powers. So I would agree that there were kudos to TPD and the city manager for how they've executed the ordinances that are in place, and now the burden shifts to the city courts.
Very well, let's move on to item number 4.
Who reviews the IFBs and why isn't an evaluation committee used? And what are the contracts for municipal improvement districts exempted? In addition to the financial transactions, which departments of procurement, RFP, and IFB not overseen by the City of Tucson Procurement Department? What is the reason for this? So with that, I give you Mr. Nyhart.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Penrith, Mr. City Manager. Thank you for the opportunity today to kind of walk through our different techniques in procurement.
You guys are been camping out? Here and there.
Here and there? Yeah, have you been cited?
We're getting citations, yeah.
How many have you had?
I have one.
I go home at night and come back in the morning.
He's close to the park.
Oh,
Yeah,
so you haven't been ticketed?
No.
But you're both supporting the Occupy Tucson, Occupy Wall Street idea?
Yeah, the big thing to remember with the citations and staying overnight is we wouldn't have the momentum and the capacity if we're not staying overnight. If we made this like a once a weekly or once type of thing, you wouldn't have as many people as we have out there supporting our cause.
So why not just ask for a permit?
Well, it's $150 a day, and actually I find it very funny because this is us practicing freedom of speech, but that's not free for us. Freedom of speech costs money in this country because it was to my understanding that as a citizen it's our constitutional duty to uphold and redress Congress as we see fit. I didn't know that costed money to do that. I guess in political campaigns it could.
Everything costs money though, doesn't it?
Yeah, well that's what this is about, which I find very ironic because we are highly against the exploitation of money and who it benefits and who the capitalist casualties really are in this society.
Exactly.
What's the essential point that you're trying to make? What should people who are not hanging out at the park know about what you guys are doing?
Oh, there's a lot of people who know about this movement, and unfortunately, they're at their house, so they don't really have their numbers heard. But I don't know. We're here for them. We're here for their cause. We're here for the people. And basically, there is a stronghold. There's a stronghold on our entire community, set by monopolies, set by corporations, providing us with living options which people do not want to follow. They do not want to follow these options, but that's the only solution and the answer that they have. This is what this is about, and we're trying to set an example on how we need to be living on a community sense and hopefully overall a global sense.
And this just to raise awareness a lot, like a lot of us have just been letting things happen and we don't consciously try to change what's going around us. And I worked for the Air Force Base for about a year, re-roofing their structures there, and I hurt my back there, got no workman's comp. So I'm here for human rights, unionization of the state, and everybody's here for different causes, but we know that as one, we will bring change about a lot better with the causes united. And, everybody is more than welcome to come out and support and bring their own cause to the table. Nobody is told to not talk. So we're just uniting, and sticking together, and we are America.
You probably have to mention it every time.